he first came to the national spotlight because he had a tent revival set up on North Denver, and this was the early 50s. And Oral was the first big-time evangelist that said racism was wrong. It was just wrong. And he said, I don't care what color you are, come, we're all brothers and sisters and we'll worship together. And so they had Klansmen who showed up at the tent rally, and they had, you know, scared some people and made a show of walking around in their robes. But apparently, the second or the third night, someone took a pot shot through the tent, and that got national headlines, and then everyone in the country knew who Oral Roberts was. And it was something that he felt very passionately about, because he saw too many of other evangelists and other ministers who were going around who did keep their tents segregated, and he thought that was terrible. He thought that was awful. And he said, I myself have been the victim of racial prejudice when people found out that I was part Indian, and I never wanted to be accused of that. He later on went to Israel when Israel first became a nation, and told me that he sat in the gardens with Ben Gurion and talked to him about Israel's history and Israel's future. And of course, Oral believes that there is going to be a final battle, and that it's going to take place, and it'll be there in the Middle East. And so he was passionately involved in promoting Israel, and thought that was a very important goal. And it surprised me when he told me how many Jewish prayer partners he had. He said, they may not believe as I believe, but they believe in some of the goals that I have, and so they contribute willingly to the ministry. And everything was always about the ministry. He felt very much, he told me that he felt very much called to go into Africa, and that he was, when he first went there to preach, he was first overwhelmed by the huge crowds, because he might have a crowd of 150,000 people that showed up, and have to work through a translator. And that when it came time for him to give the healing call and to let people come up and let him pray over them, he said there would be thousands of people that would show up, and that he would pray for hours and hours. And that kind of became one of the keys of the medical school, because he realized early on that he could graduate medical students, and they might be very passionate about going on medical missions, but because they had a great deal of debt in paying for their medical school, then they wouldn't go on the trips. They would have to go to work, and they'd have to earn money to pay off those debts. And that's when he came up with the idea of raising enough money so that everyone went to medical school for free. And there were a lot of people, not just in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but all around the country, who kind of sneered at the idea of his medical school and sneered at the students and the teachers that were there. But he had a way of going around, and he found some tremendous doctors, some tremendous physicians that continue to practice here in Tulsa today. Surgeons and radiologists and every different kinds of specialty. I think all of the people were religious, but not necessarily religious in an evangelical sense. I mean, I met a surgeon whose wife was the daughter of the Vatican's ambassador to this country. I mean, and he was deeply Catholic, but he thought that Oral's goals with the medical school didn't conflict at all with his personal beliefs, and he came here very excited about working in a place where you would pray with your patients as well as give them medical care. And the students were incredible. They were all very, very smart young people who'd done very well on their MCATs. They were not rejects. A lot of them could have gone any place they wanted. And of course, some were drawn by the idea of graduating without any debt. But there were just as many that were just intrigued by the idea of somebody that was going to allow them to fulfill their dream and to go into medical missions in Africa or Asia. and treat people that didn't have any sources for medical treatment. So Oral was able to catch into the dreams and the ambitions and the hopes and beliefs of other people. And that's a very, very charming thing. He also had the knack of, when you talked to him, he focused his attention on you 100%, which is it's very captivating. It's something that very few people do, is to really focus on what you're saying, really listen to what you're saying. So much so that sometimes he would stop you and say, wait a minute, say that again. I want to remember how you said that, because that's something important, that you've hit on something that's really solid. And that's charming too. I asked him once, when there was this huge outcry all over the country when he said that he either had to raise $8 million or God was going to call him home. And I said, Oral, didn't you know what people were going to say when you said that? And he said, well, yeah, I knew what they were going to say, but that's what God told me to say. What am I going to do? And that was frequently his response to things. When I asked him about the 900-foot Jesus that appeared and was able to lift the City of Faith Hospital so easily, to show him how easy it was for Jesus to do it. And I said, well, a 900-foot Jesus. I mean, you knew people were going to make fun of you, that there were going to be cartoons. And he said, I know, but that's what I saw. That's what God showed to me. I can only tell what God told me and what he showed me. He told me that he talked to God, really talked to him. Now, he would get what he called messages, and he said maybe people just call it their conscience, that little voice inside your head that gives you guidance. And he believed those messages came from God, but he said he had 23 actual discussions with God, where God talked to him and gave him instructions and told him what to do. People focus more on the really big accomplishments, the building of the hospital, and the opening of the medical school and the law school, and all of those things. But he was much more focused on the things that happened early in his career. And I said, you're not famous for this little thing that you did in this church or this thing. And he said, yes, but it's when I was young. It's when my faith was still young. And it's when I became very powerful. I could feel the power of the Lord working in my hands. And he said it was the most exciting time of my life. And I like to think that he remembers that with the same kind of joy that he obviously experienced when he went through it the first time.